All right, good morning, everybody. We seem to have, our ranks are a little bit depleted by attrition. I have 21 participants. We're down, I think yesterday we had 26, so I don't know what to say, but it looks like all the regulars are here and we can get going. So good morning, my name is Alan Lilly, presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resources Control Board's Administrative Hearings Office. Today is March 24th, 2022. And it's just after 9 a.m. This is a continuation of the rebuttal phase of the hearing on the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc., who I do refer to as BlueTriton usually. I don't see any new appearances. I think everybody has previously appeared, so I'm not going to go through appearances again. And unless there are any preliminary matters, where my notes indicate we are is for Mr. Sanders to begin his redirect questions for Mr. Nichols. So Mr. Sanders, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Mr. Nichols, during cross-examination Monday by Mr. Petrozelli, you were asked several questions regarding statements from reports prepared by the hydrodynamics group, which was PT 45, and Dames and Moore, which was PT 23. Do you recall that? Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
Apologies. Yes, I recall that.
Thank you. In the testimony and exhibits that you prepared for this hearing, including BTB 6, 7, and 9, did you rely on any conclusions in the reports prepared by Dames and Moore?
I didn't rely on any conclusions from that report.
In the testimony and exhibits that you prepared for this hearing, did you rely on any report prepared by the hydrodynamics group?
No.
And why did you not rely on the previous work by Dames and Moore or the hydrodynamics group?
My understanding was that some of that work was inconclusive. And of course, our objective was to induct a new set of studies to try and extend the observation period and develop more relevant data.
Thank you. During cross-examination by Mr. Petrozelli and Ms. Doty, you were asked several questions regarding your technical report submitted as Exhibit BTB 7. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you provide your report or the substance of your report to the State Water Board's prosecution team prior to the issuance of the draft CDO?
Yes. In particular, I believe we reported to the prosecution team via conference call.
When was that?
I don't recall the exact date, but I believe it was in late April of 2021.
So is it your understanding that the State Water Board prosecution team was well aware of your investigation and report and the conclusions of the report as of at least April of 2021?
Yes.
So excuse me, Mr. Sanders, I do want to interrupt for a minute here, and I'm not trying to trip anybody up here, but I'm just a little confused. Mr. Nichols, the original date of the report that we have, Exhibit BTB 7, is July of 2021. So I think it would be good if you clarify what you provided in April of 2021 to the prosecution team, because obviously it wasn't the report that's dated 3 months later.
Certainly. At the time that we had a conference call and PowerPoint presentation with the prosecution team in April, we presented the principal conclusions of the report and certainly the findings of each of the study components that were completed at that time.
Do you have anything further, Mr. Lilly?
Thank you. Rose.
Are we able to move on?
No.
I think we need to pause. I think we've lost the judge.
Okay.
His staff will be, they're all on here. They'll be looking into it.
Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break and just
Okay.
go ahead and go off camera, but everyone stay online.
Thank you.
Although I think I just got reconnected.
You are back with us.
Okay, so Mr. Anderson just told me by phone that he called a 5-minute break. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to be so controversial with my questions, but apparently it caused my connection to break off. So we'll just stand by here until 9:11. It looks like, Mr. Sanders, can you hear me now?
Okay, so we're just gonna hold for a few minutes. Is that
Well,
still correct?
Yeah, okay,
That's fine.
as long as let's just make sure everybody's back and then we'll start again. I apologize. I thought you had lost connection, but I think I lost connection. Or maybe we both did, I don't know. My internet's usually pretty good, but there are limits. Okay, we'll just wait as if we have Mr. Donlin and Ms. Belenky still are not back. So we'll wait just a minute. I apologize.
I'm back.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here.
I just
Thank you.
thank you, Ms. Belenky. I can hear you. I just don't see you.
Well, I didn't put on my camera.
And that's fine. And Mr. Donlin, if you can tell us when you're reconnected, then we'll get started. And again, Mr. Anderson said 9:11, so I'm not going to start early unless everybody's here. All right, I see Mr. Donlin is back. It looks like Ms. Fry is still doesn't appear yet. Oh, there's Ms. Fry. Okay, so we have everybody who's been participating is back now. I apologize. I don't know whether it was something I said or what, but it seemed to have temporarily suspended my internet connection. So I did hear Mr. Nichols' explanation of what he presented to the prosecution team in April of 2021, even though the report was not dated, the original draft of the report was not dated till July of 2021. So thank you, Mr. Nichols. And Mr. Sanders, you may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Nichols, did you advise the prosecution team or the state water rights enforcement team that your report was done or almost done during that April meeting?
Yes, I believe at that time, we would have reported that the document was in preparation.
And were there any substantial changes between April of 2021 and the date of final completion of your report to the conclusions?
Not from the conclusions that were presented in the conference call.
Thank you. Did anyone from the prosecution team or the State Water Rights Enforcement Division ask for a copy of your report?
Not to my knowledge.
Did anyone from the prosecution team or the State Water Rights Enforcement Division ever ask for any of the information that you relied on in your report?
No.
Did anyone from the prosecution team or the Water Rights Enforcement Division reach out to you with any questions or to further discuss your investigation findings or report?
No.
How long after your meeting with the prosecution team about your report was the final report of investigation issued?
I don't recall exactly, but I believe it was within a few days.
Thank you. In the cross-examination by Story of Stuff, you were asked numerous questions about data collection protocols. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is the objective of data collection to collect the most accurate information?
Yes.
Do you follow an accepted data collection protocol when a protocol exists?
To the extent that the protocols exist and are relevant to the scientific work that we're trying to accomplish, yes.
And what data collection protocol do you follow when there are no accepted data collection protocols?
When there's no accepted data collection protocol, we'll apply hydrologic principles, our knowledge of the geologic and hydrologic conditions at the site, and then apply basic scientific principles using the judgment of our team. And our team, of course, extends much further than just myself.
Thank you. Can I have BTB 7, page 77, please?
All right, Ms. Mullen, please post BTB 7 and move to PDF page 77.
Thank you. During your testimony, Mr. Nichols, you were asked several questions about operations of the tunnels. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Please describe how water flows into this tunnel.
This diagram shows the interior layout of Tunnel 2. In Tunnel 2, water flows into the tunnel by upwelling in certain areas of the floor. And then at the back of the tunnel, there's an opening in the concrete lining that exposes fractured rock into the tunnel. And water seeps from that fractured rock a few inches above the floor of the tunnel.
Thank you. Can I go to the next page, BTB 7, page 78?
All right, we have BTB 7, page 78 on the screen.
Thank you. Please describe how water flows into this tunnel.
This drawing is a drawing of the interior of Tunnel 3, and water inflow into Tunnel 3 is the actual mechanism or occurrence of water is very similar to Tunnel 2, where water upwells in certain areas of the floor and also seeps from the sidewalls a few inches above the floor.
Thank you. Can I have PT 45 posted, please? And specifically
Okay.
page 4.
We'll go to exhibit PT 45, page 4. right, and it might be good for me and probably for others as well, since I don't remember this. Ms. Mullen, could you just go to page 1 so we can see what this is? Okay, so thank you. Whoops, just go back up to the top for just one moment. I think, can you scroll up just a little? I think this said hydrodynamics group. Yes, thank you. So just for me and others who don't remember this exhibit, this is a report apparently by the hydrodynamics group called Investigation of the Arrowhead Complex 1 and 8 for FDA compliance. And if you can just scroll down, we'll see if there's a date. And it's dated April 1998. So now you go to page 4. Thank you. I just wanted to know what we were looking at. So go ahead, Mr. Sanders.
Sure. During cross-examination Monday by Mr. Petrozelli, you were asked a question about a statement from this report addressing the location of boreholes 1 and 8 being in a tributary ravine. Do you recall that?
I do.
And in particular, this is in section 2.2, if we can go down just slightly in the first paragraph. In your opinion, was that statement in the hydrodynamics report accurate? And maybe go ahead and take a moment to read it if you'd like.
And you're talking about the first paragraph in section 2.
The first paragraph, and in particular, the statement that, well, sorry. It's the second sentence, which begins on Arrowhead Complex 1 and 8.
Mm-hmm. I see it.
And, in your opinion, is that statement accurate?
With regards to what hydrodynamics is referring to as the complex, I don't have a way to know what they established as the bounds for that, or where the location of any natural surface water expressions might have been related to that. And I don't know what information they based that on. I see that they refer to plate 1, but I don't believe plate 1's included with this document.
Would that be helpful for your assessment as to whether it was accurate or not?
It would at least show me what they believed, I guess the bounds of what they were talking about, and if possible, maybe even have a citation to what information they used to determine that.
Thank you. Would springs 1 and 8 have discharged naturally into a drainage of Strawberry Creek if the boreholes had not been drilled?
I don't know.
And what's your basis for your conclusion?
Wait. There is no conclusion. He said he didn't know. So
Okay.
I don't know how you can have a basis for not knowing something.
Fair enough. Can we bring up SOS 51?
Okay, let's get exhibit SOS 51. All right, and I believe we've seen this before. This is one of the Rowe documents, and this, I think it's a letter that was written by Mr. Rowe to Mr. Lippincott and Mr. Hill. So go ahead, Mr. Sanders.
Um,
I don't see a date on it, but probably in that same, we can assume it's in the time frame of the early 1930s. So go ahead.
yes. Mr. Nichols, are you familiar with this document?
I am.
Do you recall answering questions from Mr. Petrozelli about this document?
I do.
Please turn to page 2 of this document, if you don't mind.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, please scroll to page 2. And let us know where you want us to go on page 2, Mr. Sanders.
The first full paragraph, please.
Okay, I think she's going to try to scroll up a little bit here.
Just slightly. Oop.
Whoops. Sometimes these things are a little tricky. Please bear with us.
This is okay.
Yeah, I think it's just having trouble loading. It's probably has a fair, it may have some megabytes at the end. Okay, we're getting there. So, Mr. Sanders, do you want this carryover paragraph from page 1 to page 2?
No, I want the first full paragraph, if you don't mind, please.
Okay, so let us just a minute. Hopefully it'll scroll down. We're getting there. Okay, so you want the paragraph that starts the stream flow of Strawberry Creek, May?
Yes, please.
Okay. Bear with us. I think it'll click down in just a minute.
Can we show the entirety of that first full paragraph?
Yeah, I think she's trying to
Okay, that's fine.
get it. So just bear with us. We'll try to get that paragraph on the screen if it'll scroll. We're getting there. It's just for some reason it's loading slowly. Hopefully one more click will do it. Okay, we have it.
Thank you. Okay.
So Ms. Mullen, don't move the page now until
we're
Mr.
good.
Sanders is done with this paragraph. So go ahead with your question. Sorry.
Thank you. Do you recall answering questions from Mr. Petrozelli about this document?
I do.
Okay. Please take a moment to review the entire paragraph, if you don't mind.
I've been reading it while it was scrolling. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So please take a look at the 11th line down. And it begins with the third class, and it starts from the very left side of that paragraph. Okay.
I'm still trying to find it. Sorry, counting the lines didn't. The 11th line down, or were you talking about the word this last mentioned class?
No, sorry, from the top. So we have the first line is the stream flow, second's divided, third but.
Okay, I see it.
Okay,
I see it.
So in this sentence, what springs is Rowe referring to here?
I don't see him referring to any specific spring.
Thank you. And when Rowe refers to headwater springs, do you know to which springs he was referring?
I don't recall seeing a list of springs by name or location in the road documents that he referred to as headwaters springs.
Thank you. And just one last question, or actually, I guess two. During cross-examination by Mr. Petrozelli, you were asked, and I'm sorry, I'm done with this exhibit.
Well, you're sure? Because if we take it down, we may not get it
I'm
up.
positive.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, you
Thank
may take this down. Thank you.
During cross-examination Monday by Mr. Petrozelli, you were asked a question about the finality of your report to the U.S. Forest Service. Do you recall that?
I do.
Is your report to the U.S. Forest Service final?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And
wait,
maybe,
and excuse me, Mr. Sanders, it's a little unclear to me what report you're talking about. Do you
this would have, you're correct, Mr. Lilly.
go ahead and please clarify.
The Forest Service report that you were referring to was BTB 7, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you signed and stamped it, did you intend for it to be final?
Yes.
Thank you. We have no further questions, Mr. Lilly.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sanders, and thank you, Mr. Nichols. This has been fairly narrow scope this morning, but I will ask if anyone, presumably, Mr. Petrozelli or Ms. Doty, I think it was prosecution team and SOS questions that were covered. Does either of you have any recross that you would like to ask? And again, that is limited, must be limited to the scope of the redirect we heard this morning. Go ahead, Mr. Petrozelli.
I do, Mr. Lilly. I do need a moment to check SOS 51. Unfortunately,
Oh God, we got to put it back up.
No, I'm checking
get
it on my computer, which is not very fast either.
No, if you want, we can be starting to post it if you think you're going to want to ask him about it.
Okay.
All right, I knew we should have left it up. I'm joking. So are you going to want to, or do you think you'll want us to post it? Because if so, we'll get started because it seems to be.
How about you pull it up just in case?
Okay, so Ms. Mullen,
Yeah.
Mr. Petrozelli is going through his notes and collecting his thoughts. Please put back up PT 51, page 2, the first full paragraph we had up before. I don't know why, but that seemed to be a lot slower to post than most of the exhibits have been. But
I think our experience when we were printing these is that some of these documents were captured as images, and that ends up making them very large files that take longer to load and print.
Yeah, I think we may be experiencing that too. So
yeah.
let us know when you're ready to start asking your questions, and you can go
Okay.
ahead and start with your questions while we're starting. Screen share. Oh, she got it back up. Good work. All right, so Mr. Petrozelli, please go ahead.
Okay. Can we look at page 6, please, of SOS 51? I think it's page 6.
All right, we'll go to page 6 if we can.
Yeah, this looks it. We could probably do page 5.
Okay, we can go back to page 5.
Yeah, either of them are fine.
Or you tell us. We'll have page 5 unless you ask otherwise.
So, Mr. Nichols, do you see the left-hand column in this table? Do you see the table on this page?
Yes.
I would like to direct your attention to the left-hand column. do you see in that left-hand column where it reads spring number 1 and below that number 2, number 3, and number 4?
Yes.
Would it be reasonable to infer that those 4 springs were a part of Roe's studies for this memorandum?
Yes, they were apparently part of his studies for this memorandum.
Is it reasonable to infer that they were among the springs he discussed within this memorandum?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm done with this exhibit.
All right, we'll put it down, but Ms. Mullen will leave it ready to reopen.
So, Mr. Nichols, I'd like to take you back to that meeting with the prosecution team in, I believe it was sometime in April of 2021. My date timing gets a little fuzzy during the pandemic because it's almost like the last 2 years didn't happen. But
Well, he did say April 2021,
yes,
so we
Yeah.
can go with that.
yeah. When you presented, and I believe you said you presented a PowerPoint to the prosecution team. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we shared it online.
Okay.
I don't recall that we provided the PowerPoint file.
Well, when you presented your PowerPoint, did you inform the prosecution team that you had a final report at that time?
I don't recall everything that was said necessarily in that meeting, but certainly the report would have been in preparation at that time.
Okay. Did you provide the prosecution team with a copy of the report in the form it was at that time?
No.
Okay. Did you indicate when you would have a final version of your report?
I don't recall if we shared a date. We may have discussed the timing for its completion, but I don't recall if there was a date shared.
Did you indicate what the timing of your report's completion might be?
To the best of my recollection, I think we probably discussed it, but I couldn't say for certain.
Okay. All right. Those are all my questions, Mr. Lilly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. So Ms. Doty, and again, I just a reminder, if you want to ask recross, it must be limited to the scope of the redirect that Mr. Sanders asked Mr. Nichols this morning. So do you have recross questions?
I don't have any. I believe Ms. Fry may have some.
Okay, I was going to go around. Ms. Fry, I'm going to allow you to ask questions on recross, but they must be limited to what Mr. Nichols said this morning in response to questions from Mr. Sanders. And I don't recall that he said anything about any of your prior cross-examination questions from Mr. Nichols or any of your exhibits. But if you have a question or questions, you may proceed. If we have to see you first and hear you. And yeah, there you go. Do you have any recross questions?
Yes. Can we go back to the hydrodynamics report?
Okay, that's
PT 45.
Yeah, let's put up PT 45, exhibit PT 45. All right, we have page 4, which is what was discussed before. So what is your question, Ms. Fry?
But he read a 2.1.
Yeah, so if we can scroll down to section, I think it was actually, he was reading from section 2.2.
2, okay.
And
can we go back to that. The line he read.
Okay, and I can help out Ms. Fry here. The third sentence of the first paragraph in section 2.2 reads, Arrowhead Complex 1 and 8 is at an elevation of approximately 5,200 feet and is located in a tributary ravine of Strawberry Creek at the head of Coldwater Canyon, then a citation to plate 1. So go ahead with your question.
Okay. Are the springs complex 1 and 8 located in Coldwater Canyon?
No, they're not.
Let's see. I had something else on that other exhibit you had up.
Do you mean the row exhibit or?
Yeah, the row exhibit.
Okay, so we'll put back up exhibit SOS 51. Seems to be loading faster now. What we looked at both page 2 and page 5. So where do you want us to go?
2.
To page 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll scroll up page 2 and we'll see if we can scroll down to that paragraph. We're getting a little bit faster now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have the paragraph on the screen that Mr. Sanders asked questions to Mr. Nichols about this morning. So go ahead.
Okay. He asked about the springs, but if you read the next 2 sentences and it gives the location.
Okay, so let's make sure we're at the right place here that you want him to read.
Okay. The third class, start there.
Okay, why don't you just, it might help, Mr. Nichols, just read out loud. How many, well, he'll read until you tell him to stop reading. That'll be easy.
Okay.
So Mr. Nichols,
Okay.
if you can just read slowly for the benefit of the court reporter, starting with the third class.
The third class is from rainfall, which has penetrated to depths in the shattered rocks below the reaches of the vegetation and which later issues as springs. This last mentioned class is the most stable. The accompanying hydrograph of the flow at the old intake at station 0+00 illustrates those classes of supply.
Okay. Thank you. You can stop. Would you agree that the springs feed Strawberry Creek?
My understanding of these 2 sentences is that he's referring to springs above station 0+00, which is at the hotel intake, which would potentially include springs in the upper canyon that contribute to the creek.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all.
Okay. All right, does anybody else, and Ms. Mullen, you may take that down, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Nichols? All right, thank you, Mr. Nichols. I think you're done. I know it's been a lot of work and I appreciate your efforts to clearly answer all the questions.
Thank you.
Let me move on to my notes here. All right, so Mr. Sanders, do you want to, excuse me, I'll make sure I have the right numbers. Do you want to introduce BlueTriton's rebuttal exhibits into evidence?
Yes, we do, Mr. Lilly. We would like to introduce BTB 6, BTB 7, BTB 8, BTB 9, BTB 19, BTB 20, and BTB 21 into evidence.
All right. And yesterday we ruled on some limitations on BTB 6 and BTB 7, basically, that I ruled, but I think there was consensus from the attorneys on this, that we would not admit the parts of those 2 exhibits that discuss the paired watershed study or the groundwater surface water I forget what it's called, basically combined flow model or either of those two separate models. But other than that, the offer is to admit or basically to submit all of these rebuttal exhibits into evidence. So do I have that correct, Mr. Sanders, as to what you were offering?
We understood that to be your ruling yesterday, Mr. Lilly, and yes, that's what we are offering.
All right. So with that, are there any objections to these exhibits?
It's not an objection.
Wait. Excuse me, Ms. Doty. Mr. Sanders wanted to say something.
I was just going to, my colleague, Ms. Grady, wanted to offer something.
Go ahead, Ms. Grady.
With respect to BTB7, you had asked us a question yesterday about the figures that related to the report, and we just hadn't closed the loop on that issue, and it probably would help the record to address that now.
Okay.
And you had
Yes.
asked about figures 29 through 45, if those were from the model and if those should be excluded. And in response to your request, we wanted to let you know that figures 28 through 45 would fall within the scope of those figures that related to the modeling that you have ordered excluded.
Okay, just a minute here. I appreciate this clarification. This is important. Okay, I am just a little confused about, and Mr. Nichols, I hope he didn't leave. I shouldn't have told him to leave. There he is.
I'm here.
Sorry, I'm trying to interject a little humor here. Mr. Nichols, if you can, and if we need to, we can put it up on the screen. I can't tell whether figure 28 is modeled output or presentation of data. Ms. Mullen, can you put up exhibit BTB7? It's PDF page 95.
In particular, that figure 28 is related to the paired basin comparison. And so
Okay.
it's not specifically model output, but it compares conditions in the three canyons that were the subject of the paired basin.
Got it. Okay, then we should probably include that in the part of BTB7 that is excluded. So thank you for that clarification. So yes, Ms. Grady, I agree with you on that limitation. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. You may take that down now. So with that, we have hands up. So Ms. Doty, I'll start with you. I interrupted you before. Please state your objections to these exhibits.
So I'd like to object to anything coming in that has to do with measurements of flow in the stream channel in this report. Because yesterday, Mr. Nichols testified that they didn't take into account the water releases that were being done pursuant to the Forest Service's direction. So if they are artificially adding water to the stream channel at times that he was unfamiliar with and holding it back at other times, it seems that that data is not relevant or reliable.
All right. That objection is overruled. I think that clearly goes to the weight of the evidence, not its admissibility. It's still relevant. You certainly may make that point either through rebuttal of your own by your own witnesses or in closing briefs, that there may be some issues regarding the numbers. But I think Mr. Nichols pretty clearly testified these were the flows that they've measured, and that does have some relevance to this proceeding. So that objection is overruled. Do you have any other objections?
None that I haven't previously made.
All right, thank you. So then, Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. Do you have objections? You have to go off mute so we can hear you. There we
Not so
go.
much an objection as a request for clarification.
Go
when
ahead.
these exhibits come in. It might have been yesterday or the day before we talked about how difficult it might be to parse out which parts of these exhibits may or may not rely on modeling, or the parts, or may rely on the parts that are excluded. And you suggested that if something comes in that relies on those parts that are excluded, but we didn't specifically exclude them, we could later mention that.
And I did say that, and that is correct. And this most likely would come up if somebody cited, and it could be any party, frankly, cited to a part of an exhibit that concerns the modeling that I've ruled is not going to be admissible. And I think everyone's going to be careful not to do that. But if that issue does come up, and one party thinks another party has cited to something that they should not, then the party who has that concern may file a written objection, and we'll deal with it that way. So I thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. I think we covered it as well as we could, but there are a lot of pages and we may have missed something. So that's fine.
And now that the exhibits are coming in, I just wanted to be sure that we have that clarification in the record.
So we've made that
clear for addressing it.
Excuse me. Tell people not to talk when I'm talking, then I violate my own rule. Did you finish?
I'm done.
All right. So thank you for that clarification, Mr. Petrozelli. So Mr. Lowe, your hand is up. Do you have objections to any of these BlueTriton rebuttal exhibits?
Yes, I have an issue with BTB 7. And I'm not sure what to do about it, but BTB 7 was developed as part of the Forest Service Adaptive Management Plan. In fact, on the first page there, it gives a disclaimer about what the Forest Service can do with it and all that. So we were just told that it's the final report. And it may be BlueTriton's final submission of a report, because it's supposed to be a joint report. It's supposed to be joint monitoring. It's supposed to be Forest Service approved, and yet we're being told it's a final report. So that's a fine line. I want to make sure that if we do admit it, it's not admitted as a final report that has been bought off by the Forest Service. It's actually Mr. Nichols' report to the Forest Service about what he thinks should be in the final. So anyway, I wanted to make that clear, and I think we need to clarify that, because there's a lot of conclusions, Mr. Lilly, that aren't backed up. So
okay, that's fine. And so under the rules of evidence, Mr. Nichols has adequately explained in detail the development of BTB 7, which is effectively part of his testimony. So it's being admitted as his testimony. Nobody, BlueTriton has not suggested, nor has anyone else, that the Forest Service has any reaction. And we did see the comments on the modeling, which we have largely excluded. But nobody is suggesting the Forest Service has approved or disapproved or said anything about BTB 7. So we're treating it as part of Mr. Nichols' testimony. And as far as whether there are conclusions that you think are not supported in that's the sort of argument you may make in your closing brief. You and of course any other party. But that does not affect the admissibility of the exhibit into evidence. So with that, are there any other objections? Seeing no hands, I will admit exhibits BTB 6 through 9 and 19 through 21 into evidence, subject to the limitations that I ruled on yesterday in BTB 6 and 7 regarding references to the paired watershed study and the modeling. And I am going to write out those limitations in the written ruling I'm going to make as soon as I have time regarding the various motions. So I will list that as well. So we should have a good record of that. All right, let me check my notes and see where we are. The next matter on my agenda for this morning are the AHO staff exhibits, which were exhibits 1 through 4, which I discussed on Monday and then mentioned again yesterday. Does anybody have any objections to exhibits AHO 1 through 4 being admitted into evidence? Ms. Grady, go ahead. I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lilly. BTB objects to them being moved into evidence. We have no problem with it being part of the record. But our understanding was the purpose of the site visit was to allow you and your staff opportunity to see the facilities, And with parties not sworn in advance and very explicit instruction from you ahead of time that that was the purpose and that you would not be taking testimony, we do have concerns about this being brought in as evidence as opposed to just part of the record.
And Ms. Grady, are you specifically referring to the oral statements that people made that were recorded on the video? Because I think that may be different from the pictures that were taken.
The bigger concern is about the oral statements. I think generally we think it's more appropriate just to make it part of the record as opposed to evidence because of the circumstances of how it was created. But we are very concerned about oral statements and folks citing to that as testimony when you gave very clear instructions in advance of the proceeding that it was not going to be testimony, that people wouldn't be sworn in.
I am sorry, but I do not remember ever saying that. I don't think I said that. I think I said I was going to do some things for crowd control purposes, just from a logistical point of view, but I was going to make sure that every party had at least one representative at the places where we did the basically asked questions. I think all the questions were of Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Nichols, and I believe representatives of all the parties were there during all of those times. Certainly Mr. Sanders and Mr. Petrozelli were there. And for story of stuff, it was Mr. O'Heaney instead of Ms. Doty at her request. So I and Mr. Lawrence previously had taken the oath. And then on Monday, I asked Mr. Nichols after he took the oath to affirm his testimony. Now, again, I don't know how much I'm going to rely on any of those oral statements made by Mr. Lawrence or Mr. Nichols during the site visit for developing proposed findings in my proposed order, but I don't think there's any reason why those should be limited and cannot come into evidence. I don't see any rule of evidence that would prohibit those from coming into evidence, and I certainly don't see any prohibition evidentiary rules that would prohibit the photographs from coming into evidence. So I don't know, do you want to say anything further, Ms. Grady? Those are certainly my thoughts.
Well, with respect to the conversation, you did state beforehand that you would not be swearing in folks ahead of time. And I don't think anybody treated it as sworn testimony. If I recall correctly, your discussion was you wanted conversation to be limited to folks. Essentially, the way I think you described it was, as best the folks could do it, point to something and say what it was. For things that went beyond that, it's just very unclear how that would be used in the record as evidence.
Okay, and I don't think I don't know, Mr. Sanders, you were there. I don't know if you can remember. I mean, I worked pretty hard to make sure it was limited to just describing what we were seeing there. But I do think for that purpose, it is appropriate evidence. I mean, again, I don't know how important this is going to be to the findings in the proposed order, but I don't think I should limit those from coming in. Mr. Sanders, do you have anything you want to add on that?
No, Mr. Louie, my one, as Ms. Grady said, we didn't have anybody sworn in ahead of time, and I apologize for the gardener in the background. We did not have anybody sworn in ahead of time that would have put them on notice that this would be used as testimony. I do have concerns that there were various discussions because of the limited spacing in which not all parties had the opportunity to listen in and to ask questions. There were numerous questions that were asked that I would have objected to had that been a methodology that we had discussed up front. We intended this to be a fact finding, and the parties had ample opportunity to be able to cross-examine Mr. Nichols, during rebuttal phase if there were any questions that arose as a result of the site visit. So I concur with the comments of Ms. Grady.
Okay, so Ms. Fry, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
I would like to know if you're going to come and visit the upper spring site again without a foot of snow. And honestly, the road was closed when I tried to go up, and it required a four-wheel drive vehicle, which mine's very old. I usually drive a Fiat, to be honest. It does not go through that kind of condition. So I want to know if you are planning on revisiting the upper sites without a foot of snow.
Okay, and the answer is no. We're not. It's in a perfect world we probably would, but we certainly got a lot of very valuable information. I agree. If there hadn't been snow, we probably could have seen a little more. But just from a logistic point of view, it was a lot of logistical work to set up the site visit, and I don't at this point see that I plan to do that again. I mean, something could change my mind, but right now I don't see that. I'm sorry you were not able to get up there. We did wait. We were supposed to start at 9 o'clock. We ended up starting at 11:30 or 12, and by then the roads had cleared enough that most people were able to get up there. I understand there was some uncertainty. There were chain controls in the morning, although they lifted those. So anyway, here is what I'm going to do. As I said before, Mr. Lawrence had previously taken the oath. Mr. Nichols confirmed his testimony. I think those were the only two people, at least that I remember, that had anything substantive to say about what we were seeing. I certainly don't anticipate using those statements in the field to develop findings on the history. Certainly nothing, as for example, as to an interpretation of the Rowe report or the hydrodynamic study or things like that. I think it would be primarily limited to their descriptions of what we were seeing, but that potentially could include, here are the meters on these pipes. Here's the pipe that discharges the water that's not turned into the BlueTriton pipe. Here's where it discharges it down below the borehole and things like that. So at this point, I'm going to allow those exhibits AHO 1 through 4. I'm going to admit them into evidence, but I will allow Ms. Grady, Mr. Sanders, or anybody else who thinks if there's something in our draft proposed order that relies on a statement from the site visit that you think goes beyond what I said I was going to use statements in the site visit for, then you can raise that comment when you see the draft proposed order. And I will be circulating a draft proposed order for review and comments by all parties before the final proposed order, before we complete that and transmit that to the board. So I think that'll handle this issue appropriately. I don't think there's going to end up being a big dispute here, but if there is, you will have a chance to raise your objections. Okay. So with that, we will move on. The next thing on my list for this morning, excuse me, Story of Stuff Projects, February 7, 2022, subpoena ducis tecum, and BlueTriton's February 17, 2022, motion to quash. Here.
Mr. Lilly, I can make this really easy for you. We are withdrawing our subpoena.
I was getting ready for a long discussion. Sorry. That will take care of that. So that means that the BlueTriton motion to quash has become moot. So we will do that. So Ms. Fry, your hand is back up. Did I not cover something on the site visit that you want to say something more about?
I also would like to know, are you about the San Manuel photos? Were those being admitted or not?
Yes, they are. I think there's 7 of them. You saw, I posted on the record, the dialogue. The San Manuel band ultimately did not want us to come on site. We got some photos of at least of the old hotel from the helicopter. Mr. Woolridge took those. And then the tribe did provide those photos. So those have been admitted into evidence as well. I think they're AHO, exhibit AHO4. So yes, those are in as well. All right. So anything else, Ms. Fry? If not, please take your hand down. If you can figure out where to click. There we go. All right, so Ms. Doty, go ahead. I hope you're not changing your mind on your subpoena.
I'm not. I'm just want to ask a housekeeping question. Will there be a list of admitted evidence? Because I honestly, having not been on the site visit, I'm just having a little trouble finding where each of the AHO exhibits are, because they're in slightly different places than the parties hearing exhibits now. So I just want to have a list at some point so I know what's in and what's out.
Okay, and it is in the FTP folder. That's the administrative record. And what you need to do, there's a new folder I opened a few days ago called AHO staff exhibits. And then if you open that folder, it has brief descriptions of exhibits AHO 1 through 4. And for each one of them, it describes the folders in the administrative record where the exhibits are. So I think if you do a little clicking, I know as attorneys, I mean, you're probably more savvy than I am, but we usually can figure that out. So I think if you follow the links that are listed there, you will get to the folders where those files are, and then you can see the files as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. And the reason we did it that way, there are a whole bunch of files, and I didn't really want to ask my staff to label them. It would have been AHO 1 through 100 or something. So that's why we just left them in the folders of the way they had been presented to us and we had previously filed them. But they are admitted into evidence subject to the caveat I just mentioned when I was discussing this with Ms. Grady and Mr. Sanders. All right, the next thing on my list, next topic, actually the last topic on my list for today is SIR rebuttal. And again, just for those of you who aren't familiar with this, SIR rebuttal is new evidence that's given by new witnesses in response to the rebuttal evidence that was presented this week, which was, I believe, the parties that presented rebuttal evidence that I allowed were the prosecution team, Mr. Lowe and BlueTriton. So please raise your hand if you intend to submit SIR rebuttal. And let me just make a note here. I see Ms. Doty, Ms. Fry.
Maybe.
Maybe, that's fine. If you may, then please say something. Ms. Belenke and Mr. Lowe and Mr. Petrozelli. Did I miss anybody, or are those the parties that plan to submit SIR rebuttal? Or you may take your hands down. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Grady, did your hand go up too? Okay. So I do want to get a little handle on this now. So I'm going to start with the prosecution team. Mr. Petrozelli, who do you intend to call as a SIR rebuttal witness, and what is the 1 or 2 sentence summary of his or her proposed testimony?
So we're looking at, I'll qualify this. I'll say it's early in the process. We're looking at 2 potential witnesses, Tomas Eggers and Dr. Mohammed Sarabi.
Could you spell Sarabi, please?
I will. I'll spell his first and last names, and I hope I get them right. If I do, he'll
just do the best you can.
Mohammad, Sarabi spelled Sohrabi.
Okay. And what are the topics that we are familiar with Mr. Eggers, he has already testified. What are the topics that you would have them cover? And most specifically, what would they be rebutting in the rebuttal testimony?
So, so Mr. Eggers would be addressing board licensing and permitting for spring diversions using boreholes. That would rebut testimony from Mr. Nichols regarding challenging the board's permitting authority for quote unquote deep boreholes. Further testimony regarding permitting authority for boreholes 1012 and 1188. Testimony regarding tunnel 2 not being advanced into the hillside. Potentially shut-in testing and the influence of rim forest area wells on the Forest Service POD, and perhaps some brief miscellaneous responses to Mr. Nichols' testimony. Dr. Sarabi would be testifying regarding the use of weather stations and precipitation data to support conclusions in BTB 6 and BTB 7 that do not involve the use of the model or paired basin studies. Again, that's preliminary. They're just areas we've identified at this stage. It's more likely to become more narrow than broader.
All right, that is a sufficient description for today. Obviously, parties, other BlueTritons may object. I'm not ruling on any of that now, far from it, having not seen it, but thank you for that clarification. So I'll go next to Ms. Doty. What do you plan, or what are you contemplating submitting for SIR rebuttal testimony?
May I go after Ms. Belinkie, please?
All right, that is fine. So I'm going to write down Ms. Belinkie, what do you plan to talk or submit witnesses on, and who are they, and what do you plan to have them cover for SIR rebuttal?
Thank you. Currently, we intend to have an expert witness, Andrew Zidane, who's with Brew Associates.
Excuse me, I didn't quite hear that. How do you spell his name?
Andrew, Andrew, and Zidane is Zdon.
VDON?
No, Z as in zoo, DON.
Oh, Zidane. Okay, go ahead. And what would his, I assume that's the he, what would his topic be?
His topics would be responding to Nichols' testimony regarding geology and hydrology, specifically the turnout tests and other technical matters. At this time, we're not sure if those are going to include some of the other specifics like stable isotope analysis and the dye testing.
Okay. All right, Ms. Doty, would you like to tell me now who you plan to call and what your witnesses would cover?
Okay. The reason I asked for deferral is candidly, we are sharing some of the responsibility here. So we may be relying somewhat on Mr. Zidane for the same topics that Ms. Belinkie mentioned. It's possible that we would be calling Dr. Matthew Becker.
Wait, and again, you say these names fast. How do you spell Matthew's last name?
Becker.
Okay.
And that would also be to respond to technical issues raised in the rebuttal phase. We may call Paul Kybell, who is a water rights law and policy expert, as to some of the statements that Mr. Nichols made in his written and oral testimony. And then the last possible expert is potentially a map expert whose name I don't yet want to disclose.
You said a map expert?
Yes, mapping expert, yeah.
All right, I'm not going to require you to disclose that name today, but obviously you're going to have to when you submit that. All right, let's go ahead then. Mr. Lowe, I see your hand is up. So who do you plan to, or potentially may call it in SIR rebuttal as witnesses, and what will those witnesses cover? You have to go off mute though so we can hear you.
Just myself, Mr. Lilly. And I thought I followed directions, so I sent you this morning a list of all the things that I wanted to include in my SIR rebuttal. But I can tell you what those are if you want to hear them.
What, did you email that to us? I'm sorry if we didn't.
Yes,
I didn't get it. How long will, if it's just I don't need a detailed description, but can you just have kind of like 1 or 2 word descriptions of the topics? If not, I can
okay.
pull it up.
No, I can. Historical and current flows and their relationship to BTB take. Current and historical flow conditions and characterization of the hydrological surface water relationships. Claims of historical BTB withdrawal of springs. Early BTB interest and responsibility in removing alders from the stream. Shut-in testing and conclusions. Springs in fractured bedrock geology. Piezometer limitations for this work. Claims of no effect on surface hydrology and spring and stream function. PowerPoint claims and assertions. Science versus advocacy regarding testimony. Effects of spring water on spring and stream function. Water Board authority to regulate take. And that's it.
Okay. And then Ms. Fry, I think your hand was up. Who do you plan to call it in rebuttal, SIR rebuttal, and what will he or she cover?
Okay, I'm still talking to people, geological and cartographic issues.
Okay. All right. And then Ms. Grady, what does BlueTriton plan to call? Who and for what purpose for SIR rebuttal?
We would like to reserve the right to call our 2 witnesses back to the stand just to respond, provide limited testimony in response to the prosecution team's rebuttal case. So it would be very limited. And then.
Okay, so that's Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Nichols.
I apologize.
No, I got it. Okay, go ahead. Anything else? All right, so Mr. Lowe, your hand is still up. Is that an artifact or?
Sorry.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lilly.
Go ahead, Ms.
Just
Green.
because this came
no,
up
Ms.
before,
Doyle.
just because this came up before, it's possible that I would have somebody else just for authentication of documents received from public agencies. But that would be very limited.
Okay. All right. I have scheduled this SIR rebuttal hearing for April 27, 28, and 29. I have some concerns, but we have some other AHO matters the following week, which is why I didn't set it for then. I'm going to just check my calendar. I may take a break and ask us to come back, but first of all, it really does, your SIR rebuttal testimony really does have to be responding to rebuttal testimony. And so I will require that at the beginning of each section, you list what it is rebutting. But you do have a right to rebut testimony that was submitted on rebuttal here. I am concerned that 3 days may not be enough. And if we don't get it done during those 3 days, because of various schedule conflicts, we're not going to be able to get going till the middle of May. So what are people's timing looking like on April? Or I'll just say, does anybody have any problem if we start on April 25 and go on April 26 as well? All right. So I think we are going to do that because
I'm checking my calendar still.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. That was very quick.
Yeah, I was too.
I was happy that nobody objected.
You
Sorry,
went too fast. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to just give you a moment. And while you're doing that, don't log off, but I'm going to go to my calendar and make sure we don't have anything else set for those days. Mine being my office's calendar. All right, go ahead. Mr. Lowe, is your hand up or are you just? Go off mute. Maybe if your hand wasn't up, that's fine. All right, so Miss Belenke.
My calendar looks like it's free, but I did not clear those dates with our potential expert. And I did clear the other dates. So I really would need more time to be able to do that.
Okay, but we could still start with other parties if we needed to and make sure to schedule your witnesses for those 3 days if we have to. So
That could work. Yes.
yeah. And has anybody else raised a concern? All right, I would just say go ahead and
Mr. Lilly.
those. Go ahead. I hear something else. Mr. Lawrence.
This is Larry Lawrence. I have a conflict at 1 on the 28th from 1 till 5 in the afternoon on the 28th. That's otherwise open.
1 to 5 p.m., April 28th?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, we certainly can work your testimony, if any, so at some other time. We'll do a little juggling if we need to. We may proceed with the hearing with your attorneys without you on that afternoon. But trust me, you have very qualified attorneys, so they will be able to represent BlueTriton even if you're not there for that afternoon. But we won't ask you to testify when you're not there. Any other schedule conflicts that I'm hearing? Okay.
Mr. Lilly, and I apologize. I'm not positive. I need to clarify. I think that we do have a conflict with Mr. Nichols.
Oh, where did Mr. Nichols go? Mr. Nichols, come back.
I'm here.
What are your schedule conflicts?
Well, I think I have a schedule conflict on the 27th through the 29th, but I fear that I'll, in deference to the group, I'll tell the corporate folks to find a way to get by without me. So I do have a conflict, but I'll move it.
Okay, well, thank you. And we certainly, you don't need to be here except when you're testifying. So I can't imagine you're going to need to testify for 3 days again. And if possible, we could, we'll have to see. I probably would not want you to go first. I think it probably makes sense for the other parties to present their rebuttal first and then you, but we will try to work with you on scheduling if we can. But I appreciate your working with us on scheduling as well.
Absolutely.
If the corporate folks are BlueTriton people, you can tell them this is really important to BlueTriton. So, and I'm sure they know that. All right. Well, so I will go ahead and send
Lilly.
out a.
Excuse me, Mr. Lilly.
Oh, there's
My
more.
hand's
Miss Grady, I'm trying to get through. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's hard to see my hand. I just want to clarify that for BlueTriton, with what is being presented here as far as the outline of what we're anticipating, we would ask that we do take Mr. Nichols' schedule into consideration. He is our expert, and for purposes of listening to expert technical testimony, as competent as I feel I may be as an attorney, I do rely heavily on Mr. Nichols' assistance with respect to technical issues, and I think BlueTriton Brands would be severely prejudiced if testimony was presented when Mr. Nichols was not available. And I believe I got to know that he may have the same conflict as Mr. Lawrence on the 28th, even if he's able to adjust the other things.
Okay, well, we're going to see how that goes. As I said, I do appreciate, I understand what you're saying, although I will point out, this is one of the reasons we require written proposed testimony and the exhibits ahead of time, which frankly should, and I'll say must, lay out what the witnesses are going to say. So the purpose of the hearing is brief summaries of that and then cross-ex. But I understand what you're saying, and I do appreciate Mr. Nichols' willingness to ask corporate to change this. As I say, normally we have more flexibility, but it's just, we do have, believe it or not, my office and my colleagues are conducting other hearings and we have some matters set. So we're going to have some schedule conflicts. So that's why I want to block out that week and use as much of it as we possibly can for this, because otherwise it's going to drag on quite a bit. If it has to, it will, but if it doesn't, I'd prefer it not to. And one of the reasons is, you might say, what's the problem with another few weeks for the hearing? But then that pushes back the time for closing briefs, because I know you're all going to say you don't want to file your closing briefs until you've completed the hearing. So it ends up having a cascading delay effect. All right, Ms. Grady, go ahead.
Yes, I just had two other questions. And the first is regarding BlueTriton Brands subpoena directed to the prosecution team and the pending motion to quash, because we did still want to reserve the opportunity to either examine the prosecution team witnesses or present testimony in relation to that document if you deny the motion to quash.
Okay. So on that, I'll just tell you, for scheduling purposes, I haven't made a final decision, but right now my intent is to grant that motion and not to require the prosecution team to produce that document. So if that's the case, that won't affect our scheduling. And of course, the ruling will lay out the reasons, so I'm not going to get into that now. But for some reason, I end up going in a different direction, we certainly will make accommodations so that you can ask the question, presumably fairly limited, but you'd want to at least authenticate that document. So thank you for that. But I did want to let you know that's where I've headed on that. So what is your other question?
And my other question is, since we're looking forward in scheduling and based on the representation about the scope of new information and evidence that is anticipated to be placed into evidence, we would ask that you also schedule Sir rebuttal as BlueTriton Brands as the entity which is subject to action by the state agency is entitled under Government Code 11425.10A1 the right to present and rebut any evidence against it, and it has a due process right to do so as well.
All right, what I'll do is, I don't, at some point this has to end. And I'm not saying you're disputing that, but I understand what you're saying. You have no way to know right now what Sir rebuttal is going to be presented. So I certainly understand you may think that there's something else that you need to have additional evidence responding to that on. So I think what I better do is reserve some additional hearing dates in late May, just to alert everybody. I don't know what they're going to be yet, but I'll do that for that purpose. Just for two reasons. Number one, for that purpose, and number two, if we don't finish or if there's any other cleanup, and we'll see where we are. So thank you for that clarification. I certainly understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
All right. So I don't see anything else. There is the question of the deadline for submitting the Sir rebuttal. And just so you know, historically the Water Board has just had people testify on rebuttal and Sir rebuttal without having the requirement of written proposed testimony. I find the written proposed testimony is just a far more efficient way to proceed. I mean, it gives all of you time to work with your witnesses to really hone the written proposed testimony. So, it's just going to be better than if somebody is testifying on the fly. And it's certainly better than if somebody just reads their testimony. So that's why I'm doing that with the exhibits. It takes a little longer, but I think it ends up being cleaner and more efficient for all of us. So I want you to have time to do that. You all did have the rebuttal exhibits and written proposed testimony on February 14th. So you've had them for somewhat over a month already. And I do, as I said before, I really want the start of each section to say exactly what it is rebutting. And it has to be rebutting rebuttal testimony. So there were requests to change that deadline from April 4, where it currently is, to April 13. And I think that's appropriate. So unless there's any further discussion on that, we will change the deadline. I'm going to make a note. For the written proposed rebuttal testimony and related exhibits from April 4, we'll change it to April 13. I'm going to make it at 1 p.m. I think that's the time of the other one. Just so you know, I hate noon because if I put p.m., nobody knows whether it means noon or midnight. So that's why I don't use noon. But we like to get them before 5, so we have time to start processing them that same day. I get them posted so all of you can see them that same day. So that is my plan. Ms. Fry, your hand was up first. Go ahead.
I just want you to clarify, since this is, I'm having to learn the legal world real quick, right? Through all
You're
this.
doing very well. You're learning fast. Go ahead.
Thank you. So can you just tell me exactly what I need to submit? And so can you just go down what you're expecting so I understand?
Yes, if you have your witnesses want to submit, first of all, the format for the written proposed testimony is exactly the same as it's been for the other 2 rounds. You submit your written proposed testimony, and then your witness takes the oath and confirms that the written proposed testimony is in fact his or her testimony, and then a brief summary, provides a brief summary. The slides are very useful, as you've seen from how the prosecution team and BlueTriton has done that. It really just facilitates a clean summary, but it really does have to be a summary. It can't be a reading of a new script that's totally different than what the written proposed testimony is. And you'll get objections, and we end up wasting a lot of time if you do that. So that's the process. The requirement for rebuttal and surrebuttal beyond that is each section of your witness's written proposed testimony must say, this rebuts the testimony of, I'm going to use an example, Mr. Nichols in exhibit BTB6 at paragraphs 99 through 106. And then it says then you go ahead with your witness's rebuttal testimony. Because otherwise, we end up wasting a lot of time with objections back and forth. Does this really rebut some prior testimony, or is this new testimony? So that's why I like to do that, so it's set out very clearly. So, and then of course, we have cross-examination of those witnesses. So does that answer your question, Ms. Fry?
I hope so. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and I know you've been coordinating some with Ms. Doty, who clearly understands these procedures very well. So feel free I'll just offer her to give you advice if you need help on how to do this.
I hate to waste somebody else's money. It's very,
I understand, but attorneys do have some specialized knowledge, and I think a little coaching, would probably help you. But I think with that, for you and Mr. Lowe, I think that will work out fine. And incidentally, on rebuttal, Mr. Lowe submitted some written rebuttal testimony, provided a short summary of that, and it worked very well. That was exactly the sort of thing that needed to be done. I don't think there were any objections to that process. So that may be a good model.
And evidence is all due in on the 13th by 1. Is that right?
April.
With a new spreadsheet. Is that correct?
Yeah, you should update. Thank you. You can either update your prior exhibit spreadsheet or file a new one, but do have the new exhibit numbers start one bigger than where you ended before. Okay. So if you ended it with Fry 273, then make your next one Fry 274. And and do it that way. If it's easier for you to just prepare a new spreadsheet, that's fine. I know some of those spreadsheets were pretty long before, so that's okay. But yes, thank you. Please do that as well. And then you all upload those to our FTP site before the deadline. Nobody else can see those. And then after the deadline, we move them all over to the FTP folder that's for the administrative record. And at that point, everyone else can see them and download them. So you don't have to wait till 12:57 p.m. to upload them with the thought, I don't want someone else to see my exhibits before they file theirs. Even if you file it a day or two earlier, no one else can see them until after the deadline. So is that reasonably clear, Ms. Fry?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so Ms. Grady, your hand is back up. Do you have a further comment or question?
Yes, I do. I am objecting to the schedule change because what we have just done here is I don't even know how many parties have just stated that they are going to present expert testimony of, I believe I counted 6 or 7 potential experts. We previously had scheduled a window from April 2nd to April 27th between the submission of written testimony and the hearing on this phase 2 proceed. Our team had reported that between our experts and attorneys, we are largely out of the office through the month of April. And this hearing was scheduled in that window nevertheless. And a pre-planned trip was changed to address the change in our schedule to add this in April, despite us raising that concern. And we are now being reduced down to 12 days while we're out of office. For prepaid, very limited opportunity vacations with families, to review 6 to 7 and prepare to respond to 6 to 7 new experts seems tremendously unfair. And I just want to remind everybody, and for the non-attorneys, I appreciate your interest in this proceeding, but it's important to note that the only entity party with due process rights in this proceeding is the party against whom the state is taking action, and that is BlueTriton Brands. And this is incredibly prejudicial, what is happening right now.
Okay, well, first of all, I don't know if I agree with you that BlueTriton's the only party with due process rights. I mean, our goal with hearings like this is to provide all parties with due process of law. As I said, I have some tensions here. I previously allowed BlueTriton more time to review the first round of exhibits. This is drawing out, and I know once we get into the summer, we're going to have even more issues with schedule conflicts. So I do really want to wrap up this hearing before then. And as I said, my office has some schedule conflicts, but I do understand what you're saying. I may consider moving that deadline at least a few days earlier, but let's see. Ms. Palenke's hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I wasn't prepared to discuss you're moving the deadline back up further. It is, the timing is tight here for everybody. I actually had 2 other questions that are about this scheduling. One is, you just mentioned that people should upload the testimony and the exhibits. In the past, all of the parties had emailed all the other parties at the same time. And in the last round, that didn't happen. And we weren't aware of certain things having been filed. I think it's important that both those steps happen. Even if you're not attaching all of the testimony and exhibits, there should be notice to all the parties that something was provided.
Okay, so that's important. Whatever the hearing notice says is the process for filing, that was the process for filing exhibits the first time around, still applies. I believe it said you should upload the exhibits to the FTP folder, and we have a separate folder for each party. And then also send an email advising all the other parties that you had done that. But more important, what you're saying, and my staff is all listening, so I'm going to make sure to remind them, and I know they're listening, It's a good point, Ms. Belenky. What's most important is when we move all the exhibit files over from where they've been uploaded to the administrative record folders where everyone can download them, that we send out a blanket email to all the parties advising them that we've done that. We may have neglected to do that in the past, and if so, I apologize. But whatever the deadline is, it does take us a little while to move these exhibits. Sometimes they have a lot of megabytes, but we will make sure to send an email to all the parties advising them that they've been moved and now may be downloaded. So thank you for that reminder.
Thank you. I have a second, one more.
Go ahead.
The other question is about the transcripts. You've said that the Zoom transcripts are the official record, but they are not. I've had a hard time finding them. Are they being put all in a single folder on the FTP site? Because I have not been able to find them in a timely way. And that, of course, affects our ability to prepare the SIR rebuttal because we need to see precisely what was said.
Yeah, what we post, and again, if any of my staff wants to speak up, they can. They're all on mute right now, but they can speak up if they have to. But what we try to do, we have a couple of different people record each day just to make sure if there are any problems, we have a good one, a good recording. And then they do normally post that the file of the Zoom recording, the audio plus video file, to the hearing documents folder in the administrative record. They've been doing that, I believe, within a day or two after each hearing date. If anyone, I don't know, Mr. Anderson or anybody else, do you want to comment on that? Have we been posting the Zoom recordings to the hearing documents folder for this week?
I know Mrs. Blunk has indicated that she's uploaded the transcripts from the previous day of the following morning, so they should be uploaded.
Okay, sometimes it takes us a day, but they should be in the hearing documents folder within a day or two. That's certainly our goal. And then the Zoom also prepares a written transcript. It's, I'll say, about 80% accurate. I mean, it's just totally electronically done, and it's not the official record, but sometimes it's useful to help people find the hour, minute, and second where a discussion is. And we try to post those to the hearing document folder right as soon as we can as well. Now, let me just say something else before you go on. Ms. Dias, the court reporter, she's been hired by BlueTriton, and she is doing a transcription. And I believe, the way court reporters normally work, I'm sure she works this way, is she will prepare her certified court reporter's transcript if somebody orders it and commits to pay her for that. And I'm pretty confident she will do that for any party who wants to. Of course, that's a significant expense involved. And any party may do that, may order a transcript, and that does not become part of the record at all unless some party files that with the AHO. But if any party files that with the AHO, we will add that to the hearing documents folder. We're not paying for it. We're not ordering it. But if anybody wants to do that, then it comes in. But if we get it, we post it. We don't use it internally in a way that would not make it accessible to the other parties. So, Ms. Belenky, does that, excuse me, Mr. Anderson has something to say. Go ahead.
I've confirmed the transcripts from the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd are on the FTP in the hearing documents folder.
All right, thank you, Mr. Anderson. So, Ms. Belenky, does that answer your questions regarding that?
It does, thank you. And I guess the last thing, now that it's been raised about the time, we did seek additional time, and we would object to going back to less time for our SIR rebuttal to be submitted. I don't know what the solution there is unless there is a change in the hearing dates. I really don't, but.
Okay. Well, and I have no idea how voluminous this is going to be. So that's a little hard for me. I mean, I had not anticipated extremely voluminous SIR rebuttal test or SIR rebuttal. That's where we are, testimony, but it made me more voluminous than I had anticipated. We will have to see. So let's see whose hands were up first. I think Mr. Petrozelli, your hand was up first. So go ahead. And this is important, so I'll take as much time as we need to go over this because we don't talk very often, and I do want to talk this way so there are no ex parte issues. So go ahead, Mr. Petrozelli.
I greatly appreciate the April 13 deadline. I think it's a Wednesday. The week before that is this is personal, but my father passed away very recently, and his service is the week before that. So. If we move the deadline earlier to, a Monday or the week before, it would be challenging. So.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to hear the news about your father, and thank you for your input on that. So, Ms. Doty, was your hand up?
Yes, and I'll just echo everybody else on the and the request for an extended deadline, and that's because Mr. Becker is in the outback of Australia, which is why I'm somewhat tentative on his use. So it's difficult to connect with him, and we're trying to do that and be as efficient as possible if we are to end up using him, and as well BTB elected to, of course, leave the bulk of their testimony to rebuttal. So we're kind of in the spot that they were in after the case in chief was made. So and then with regard to the transcripts, I would just ask if BTB is going to submit a transcript that they be asked to do it earlier rather than later, because I don't, if we're referencing the official transcript and referencing another transcript, it seems that will be somewhat confusing. So I just want to know which one. Will there need to be double citations if they elect to use a privately prepared transcript also to the official transcript, because otherwise we have to cross-reference. That could be challenging.
That's a good question. My view, unless somebody convinces me otherwise, is that citations and closing briefs will be to the Zoom video plus audio recording. That's with the day, I think you have to cite morning or afternoon session, and then the hour, minute, and second for start and finish. And my view is that is our official transcript. I mean, no offense to the court reporter, Ms. Dias is a wonderful person, and from everything I can tell, an excellent court reporter. But we believe that the video plus audio recording is preferable to the court reporter transcript for a couple of reasons. Number one, we get it right away, obviously. Number two, you can see the demeanor of the witness when he or she is testifying. And number three, the exhibit is posted right there in screen share, so it can all be seen. I have been trying to state the exhibit numbers and pages so that the court reporter's transcript will also have a good reference to that. But my intent is to require closing briefs to cite to the video plus audio recording. And of course, that's another reason why the written proposed testimony is so valuable, because where possible, if parties can cite to that, it's a lot easier for you to find it, and a lot easier for me and my colleagues to find it as well. But at this point, I'm not intending to require parallel citations to the court reporter's transcript. I don't know what BlueTriton's plans were for that. I mean, obviously there could be judicial review here, and they may have it in mind for that. But that's my plan. So I hope that answers that question. So if they're filed, we'll add them to the record, but I'm not going to require parallel citations to them. So, all right, we're going around the room here. Ms. Fry, go ahead.
I have exactly where those transcripts are. I have not been able to find them. Under the file. I've looked multiple times, and I know other people have looked, and is there a file name you're putting those under so it's easy for us?
I'm going to see if I can find them right now, and I'll tell you.
I don't know.
So
okay, go ahead.
So for the BlueTriton matter, which is within the AHO FTP folder, if once you're just there in the initial set of folders, there is a folder called hearing documents.
Right.
And then if you go to the dates, there should be all the file numbers begin with the date. And I see all the hearing recordings here posted
Alan,
on
What is
the dates.
what does it say?
Mr. Lilly.
Yes, go ahead.
So the interface that they see is a little bit different. You have to go to the top of the page, Ms. Fry, and you should see a page number, and you likely have to go to page number 2.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, now scroll through the documents. They should be visible.
It's hearing recordings. Is that where that's what you're filing it under, right? Is that it? I see
Right.
it that now. Okay. Okay.
They should be, there's hearing recordings and there's hearing transcripts.
Transcripts. Okay. Okay, that helps because it's a lot to go through. Thank you.
Well, and they are, you can't listen to them any faster than they happen. So it takes a while to go through them. But that's,
Right.
the trade-off is we get them right away.
Right.
And the other
Okay.
benefits I mentioned. So that's the way we're doing that.
Okay.
For going forward, that's part of our process with Zoom. And we did mention in the hearing notice that that's what we were going to do.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so have we gone around the room here? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm really torn. I mean, I told you my concerns about getting this thing done. As far as blame, I told you I sort of am reminded of parents with children fighting. Everyone can sort of blame each other for that. I mean, yes, BlueTriton waited till rebuttal phase to submit the report, even though Mr. Nichols clearly had prepared the report a long time ago. I think they had a right to do that, but it certainly has caused the hearing to be drawn out. But as far as parties preparing rebuttal, you did have the written reports and written proposed testimony well over a month ago. And yes, there was some additional detail provided during the hearing this week, but you did have most of what was needed to rebut. But and on the other hand, it looks like there may be more detailed rebuttal testimony than I had anticipated, and now I am proposing to start 2 days earlier. So I'm going back and forth on this. This is important, and I understand you all have lives, and certainly my sympathies to you, Mr. Petrozelli, about your father. So I'm going to take a break it's 10:49. I'm going to take a break till 11 and think about this regarding the schedule. So if you can all, don't log off, but stay, just you can mute your microphone and turn off your camera. But before I do that, Ms. Fry, is your hand up again, or is it just an artifact?
I'm sorry. It was left over. Thank you.
Okay. So let me think about this, talk to my staff, and we'll come back at 11 a.m. and I'll let you know what I decide to do. Thank you. All right, I'll wait just a moment for people to get back. All right, we're getting back. Mr. Lowe, your hand is up. Do you have something you need to say right now?
I just wanted to ask while there was time here. I tried to get on to the FTP site and get as far as I could to try to get the transcripts and to also get the field trip videos. And as far as I could get was the administrative hearing office staff exhibits list, only the list of things. Would it be okay if is there anybody from your staff that could help me one-on-one get in there? And that's all, not talk about anything else, just technically how to get in there on my computer.
You know how sensitive I am about ex parte communications. And I am now going to before I looked at my internal folder, Mr. Anderson pointed out I shouldn't do that, but I'm going in through the AHO FTP folder, which is on the Water Board's FTP site. I don't know, Mr. Lowe. I mean, it looks to me like things are pretty clear here. Have you gotten to the BlueTriton matter?
Oh, yes, I'll tell you where I'm at. I went AHO FTP site, water rights enforcement, other, BlueTriton Brands, Nestle, hearing documents, parties, hearing exhibits, AHO staff. And that's as far as it would let me go. The only thing it had next was AHO staff exhibits.
PDF.
List.
So did you open that?
Yes, and it doesn't take me anywhere after that.
No, there aren't links. But that if you open that PDF file, it describes the folders in the AHO FTP folder where the different exhibits are. You have to then go back to the easiest way, which way I do is you print this page so you can remember the folder names, and then you just go back and you can go into those folders and find the things. But yeah, there aren't links there, which may be what you were looking for.
How do I get to those folders? That's what I can't figure out, is how to get to the folders.
Okay, well then you have to go back to, if you go back to the BlueTriton folder, and then within that, let's see here. Oh, maybe there's.
Alan, I can take over. So
yeah, take over, Mr. Anderson. You can help me. I think you probably have to go to a second page. Go ahead.
Mr. Lowe, go to the hearing documents folder.
Okay.
Okay.
And everyone else can do this too.
There's 6 subfolders. One's titled site visit. Click on site visit.
Oh, down at the bottom. Okay, now what am I in here? I'm in hearing documents. Okay, at that level, then I go to site visit.
Then go to AHO staff photo. There's a subfolder for AHO staff photos. That's where the photos are. There's a subfolder for AHO videos, audio recordings. And then there is a subfolder for the San Manuel Band of Mission Indian photos.
Okay, I got it. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anderson. I was getting there, but you beat me to it. So while we're on this, does anyone else have any questions about this? And this may all seem a little burdensome, but let me tell you, I'll speak from experience. Back in the old days, people had to mail paper copies of all this stuff to everyone. And we got boxes and boxes of papers, and it was expensive and time consuming. So I think this is better. But Mr. Sanders may be arguing with me. Go ahead, Mr. Sanders, your hand is up.
No, I'm certainly not going to argue with you, Mr. Lilly. What BlueTriton was proposing, we are, concerned about other people's time as well. We would be willing to extend the deadline for submittal of the rebuttal testimony or the rebuttal testimony to the 6th, the close of business on the 6th, which we think would be accommodate them to some degree. It is still, even with that time frame for us, we're still crunched, to say the least. But that is an accommodation that we are willing to offer the AHO's office to hopefully address this issue.
All right. So on that, Ms. Fry, your hand is up. Do you want to say something further?
Do you want paper copies? We need to mail in paper copies too. Is that right?
I would,
You
yes.
said that. Okay.
Yes. Just whatever the hearing notice says for the initial round of exhibits, you should do the same thing for this round. And you may have noticed I do use all those paper copies. I mark them up and put stickers on them, and it helps me so I don't have to click around. Of course, you can all print them too, which I do recommend for exhibits you're going to cross-examine about, because otherwise you have to have 2 different screens open. So Mr. Lowe, is your hand up again?
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So here's what I have decided, and I appreciate your input. I do appreciate we all have lives here and so forth. So we will have the hearing be on April 25 through 29. If we don't need all 5 days, obviously that's fine. But if we do, we'll use them. I'm going to move parties along, particularly the summaries of testimony. It certainly will be a maximum of 30 minutes. I really do encourage people to submit slides that their witnesses can use to summarize their testimony. And I'm going to tell one very short story. I'm in a group of judges and attorneys, and don't worry, we don't talk about this matter at all. But one of my friends there is an administrative law judge with the Public Utilities Commission, and he confirmed to me that their current practice, which is the same as what it was many years ago when I was there, is they don't allow any summaries of witnesses' direct testimony. The witness gets on the stand, takes the oath. Is Exhibit 5 your testimony? Yes. And then cross-examination starts. And I've toyed with the idea of doing that. We're not going to do that for this hearing. But just so you know, the summaries really do mean summaries. The written testimony is what matters, not your witness's summary of testimony. So but we will follow the same rules for this next round. The hearing's going to be April 25 through 29. I will set some reserve dates later in May when my staff and I can get back to this if we need them. I don't know if we will, but it's better to reserve them now than later. And then the deadline for uploading the rebuttal exhibits and testimony. And again, as I've said before, the parties have had the written products for over a month, and that should give you most of the information. Yes, I understand that the cross-examination of Mr. Nichols in particular provided some additional topics that need to be covered, but I'm going to make it April 7. That's two weeks from today. April 7, 1 p.m. will be the deadline. I'm just trying to split the difference here. It's all I can do. So that will be the deadline for uploading written proposed SIR rebuttal testimony and associated SIR rebuttal exhibits. And then we'll start the hearing on April 25 at 9 a.m. So Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
That is the exact day of my father's service.
Okay, well then, I don't I don't want to be harsh, but you can get it done ahead of time. You can upload them ahead of time and nobody will see them until that date, or you can have your colleagues work with that. And I feel terrible about saying, well, all right, Mr. Petrozelli, you struck a heart with me. I'll make it April 8th. That's all I'm going to do, though. You can do it all ahead of time, and you have people who can help you. But I'm very sorry about this. I mean, my father died a few years ago, too, so I know what you're going through. But I just want to get this done. So April 8th, 1 p.m. will be the deadline for uploading those exhibits. Is there anything else anybody wants to talk about today? All right. Again, if something comes up between now and then and you want to send us an email, we'll try to respond, but obviously include everyone on the service list when you do that. Ms. Grady?
I would just like to echo what Ms. Belenky said earlier, because I think it was forgotten in this last round, that on page 18 of your second notice of pre-hearing conference, it instructs in bold that when a party uploads their exhibits to the FTP site, they must send an email to the AHO and all parties. I believe BlueTriton was the only party that did that in the last round, and I apologize if I'm misspeaking on behalf of somebody else, but as we will be very crunched for time with attorneys, with our team going out of the office, we will have to move very quickly to print these things and need to know when they arrive. So it is imperative that people follow your instructions.
I thought it was in that hearing notice. I didn't think I was making that up. So thank you for reminding me and all the other parties. And Mr. Anderson, you don't need to respond right now, but please make a note. I'm counting on you. Put it on your calendar for after the April 8th deadline to make sure you send out an email to everyone advising them when we have transferred all the exhibits over to the FTP folder. But that does not remove the requirement for other parties to also send an email to everyone on the AHO service list when they have uploaded their exhibits. And again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There is no bias or prejudice to you if you upload them early. If you upload them on April 6th or April 5, nobody's going to see them until we move them over. Nobody else is going to see them until we move them over on April 8th to the FTP folder. So there's no problem with that. You don't need to be concerned about that. I know we all tend to operate close to deadlines, but you don't have to. And Ms. Blunk just advised me by text or email that she has posted the Zoom recordings from yesterday's hearing to the AHO hearing documents folder as well. So this has been hard. I appreciate everyone's patience and professionalism. I know there are a lot of disagreements, particularly on the fundamental legal issues, and I appreciate the fact that everyone has been professional and courteous to one another as we go through this process, and we will continue to do that. So, is there anything else that we need to talk about today? Hearing none, we will move on. Obviously, tomorrow's hearing date is canceled, and I will be talking with all of you on April 25th. Have a good time in the meantime. Goodbye.
Thank you.